Welcome back to the show. I have a very, very special treat for everybody today. We are going to be talking to a cybersecurity legend. Yes, we have a legend in the building who's changing the way we're looking at software development. They're changing the way we're looking at artificial intelligence, and they're definitely changing the way that we're looking at vibe coding. One of the things that many of us in cyber are holding on to because we're not the best engineers in the world, but we need this legend that we're going to be bringing on. Without further ado, run the intro.
Who says tech can't be human?
What's going on, Hacker Valley fam? Welcome back to the show. I mentioned that I have a very special guest for this episode, and this guest was actually kind enough to sponsor it and bring it on, and we put on an amazing outline. We're going to be talking about a subject that I think is in front of every single person, especially anyone out there with a builder's mindset. My special guest for this episode is Varun Badhwar, co-founder and CEO of Endor Labs. Varun is a serial entrepreneur. He's founded several companies. In fact, I've actually applied at one of your companies, Varun, RedLock, back in the day, but big shout outs to you for being on a successful, heroic, epic run. So much epic that we were talking before we hit record that you didn't take a break between your last one and this one because there's, the market, it needs you. It's too hot. But most importantly, welcome to the show.
Ron, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. And sorry, your RedLock application didn't go much further. We obviously got acquired a bit sooner than we had expected, but it was a great outcome for everybody.
It was a great outcome for everybody. Don't worry, because I applied for RedLock. There was a few other companies in the Bay and Demisto. And surprisingly, I worked at Demisto, and Demisto and RedLock both got acquired. Closest, but yeah, both at Palo Alto Networks. But now you're at Endor Labs. Tell us a little bit about Endor Labs. Why the switch? What called you? Why didn't you take a break?
Look, life was hunky-dory at Palo Alto Networks. We were building one of the best and biggest platforms for cloud-native security posture. And 2021 summer happened. And you all might remember this little incident called SolarWinds, which kind of brought software supply chain security into the foray. I didn't know much about software supply chain security, but all of a sudden, the whole world was talking about it. We got affected, lots of conversations internally with leadership and the board around software supply chain security. And that took me down the deep learning curve of, what was going on. And frankly, the biggest learning and takeaway for me was, we stand all these gates up and surveillance systems up for commercial vendors and how we assess third-party risk. Yet the side door to a house is developers, and developers have to do what developers need to do, ship software fast. And essentially, in order to do so, we don't even develop software, we assemble software. 80 to 90% of code in our code bases is not written by our developers. It's pulled from complete strangers on the internet, from open source and everywhere else. And we just let that stuff come in without a lot of vetting. There's implicit trust in that ecosystem. And more importantly, down the road, we run scanners, right, for code scanning, application security testing, static analyzers and stuff. And those things create millions of findings for an average security team every year. And what does a security team do? They do their best manually trying to kind of curtail that list, bring it down to a more manageable number. So let's say you go from a couple million to a couple 100,000. But as soon as you start shipping those couple 100,000s to your development teams, they throw up all over it, because all you're doing is taxing them in their process. Their goal on shipping software fast. And this whole system is completely broken. And, developers don't want to do anything with it. Your backlog keeps growing. And we said there has to be a better way. And so at Endor Labs, we actually invested in hiring the best people on the planet. A third of our engineering team are PhDs and world-renowned experts in program analysis and AI. And we decided to build a completely different scanning engine and methodology where we could be extremely precise in pinpointing not just theoretical risks, but actually pinpointing the core risks that apply and affect your code as your developers are bringing all of this in. The other little known fact is back starting in 2022, we were talking about malicious packages, malicious libraries, all of these software supply chain attacks that people couldn't even fathom outside of CVEs. And if you look at what's happened last week, with NPM supply chain attacks, now all of a sudden the world's waking up to this stuff. 2 years ago, we had published the OSS top 10 risks kind of standard for everybody in the industry to understand this. So long story short, our customers span from the most formidable companies in tech, be it OpenAI, Robinhood, Snowflake, Dropbox, Atlassian, Cursor, Glean, all the way to 40, 50, 100-year-old enterprise companies that are trying to modernize their software. And essentially for all of them, we do one thing really, really well. We help them ship software securely without taxing developers. Because traditionally, application security has meant a huge tax in the system, and everybody's pushing towards faster code out of the door, continuous releases, and that's what we deliver.
I have to jump in for a second and share some details about our sponsor for this episode, Endor Labs. At Endor Labs, they know that fixing is even more important than finding. Endor Labs uses program analysis to create a simulation of your entire application at the time of build. This means you can see all of your remediation options in one screen, and you know what will break if you do make that upgrade. Sometimes upgrading is too hard or too dangerous. In that case, you can use Endor Labs backported security patches that has been tested and maintained just for you. Finally, you can refactor code at your own schedule. You can learn more by visiting endorlabs.com and let them know that Hacker Valley sent you. Thank you, Endor Labs, for sponsoring this episode. Faster, more, better. I mean, that's the name of the game. It's not about being good anymore. Being good used to be good, but now you have to be great if you want good results. And I'm sure it's even more so the same when it comes to software engineering. Like, you have to be more vigilant if you want to avoid software vulnerabilities into your code. I want to bring up the NPM outbreak that you were referencing. I think that this is really important. Like you were getting at, in 2022, there was a lot of talk about software bill of materials, and it seemed like we were about to take some steps and strides to really focusing on the supply chain, and then maybe we got distracted with other things. But now it's another great opportunity with the advent of LLMs. So break down, what was this discovery here? Why did you all feel like it was important to put some research behind it and share it out with the world?
As I mentioned, going back for the last 2-3 years, we have been very fixated on this problem of implicit trust in the ecosystem of open source. And let's just for a moment think about how fundamental this open source software is to our everyday lives. First and foremost, 80 to 90% of the code in our code base is coming from open source, right? That's what our developers are bringing in libraries and React and this and that. But now with AI coding assistants, every one of those coding assistants on the planet is trained on code on the internet, on GitHub repos, publicly available code. And they don't understand the difference between good code, secure code, high quality code, scalable code, and insecure code, poor quality code, risky code, right? So they've learned the good, the bad, the ugly. And now what the statistics are showing is that 60+% of code produced by AI coding assistants is insecure by default. Now let's put a pin on this. We'll come back to that. Now, in order to answer your question, what Endor has built for the last 3 years in the back end of our platform is every time there is a new open source release of a new package, a new version, we have internet scale system that download the package, trace back the source code, and understand 150 plus indicators of risk. So we are looking constantly at the people behind these projects, their SLAs to fix issues, how they push releases. Do they have high quality gates in the process? Are large companies backing this project, or is it just some Joe Schmo in a garage that will periodically pop their head up and do something? We're looking for malicious patterns and such, so on and so forth. This has been continuing for years and years. Now what's happened is, as AI has kind of come to the forefront, we're also seeing the adversaries adopt it faster than enterprises and organizations are on the defender side.
Why is that?
Well, listen, there's some statistics. I was reading a paper. It's mind-blowing. For $2.77 of compute and AI spend, LLMs can produce exploits for almost 90% of the theoretical vulnerabilities out there. So now you don't even have to be an expert to produce exploits. And typically we would have 6, 9, 12 months in an enterprise to remediate CVEs and bugs and so on and so forth, right? That was a typical time it took to fix backlog issues. Now within hours, somebody can create an exploit. And you don't even have to be an expert to do that. In fact, in some of these NPM attacks, one of these was very interesting. A week prior, we saw the attackers create malicious packages where once installed by the developer was invoking the developer's AI coding tools on their laptop like Claude and essentially asking Claude it was giving it prompts to go steal credentials and other sensitive information from the developer's laptop. So we were already tracing these kind of patterns emerging. And then all of a sudden, this one, which kind of became known as a Shaya Alud, essentially what happened here is it became self-replicating. So it started on about September 14th. We saw some signals. So the Shaya Alud worm, you could see when it started with less popular packages. Then the pink stuff is when it hit some really popular packages with hundreds of millions of downloads. And then at some point, after all of that, an accidental developer, Daniel discovered this, screamed bloody murder, looking for some way to get GitHub and NPM's help to fix it. Didn't get help. Luckily encountered some researchers at Socket who then helped them further investigate that. But you guys keep seeing the self-propagating worm that kept going across different packages, stealing credentials and moving to the next and moving to the next until some point, I think later in September 16th, 17th, when NPM essentially then brought the IOCs for this self-replicating worm and essentially blocked them. And that's how this thing ended. Almost 500 billion downloads of these packages that were compromised, several hundred. So these are the downloads that these packages have had, which means these people already using older versions and would automatically pull up new versions as they happened, again, if they didn't have the right controls in place. So look, that's what we do. We do a lot of this research in-house. We use other third-party feeds where necessary. We're bringing that data. We're understanding the schemas. We have controls where at least our customers can block and prevent such attacks from affecting them, which kind of leads me to a bigger topic we'll talk about hopefully later in the show, is we have talked about zero trust in identity and networks and endpoints for years. Yet we have been completely ignorant for the fact that software runs most of our businesses, and that software has no zero trust. In fact, it has 100% trust. So we've got to change that equation run.
And how do you do that? Because that's actually sounds interesting. How do you make software zero trust? If it's kind of like a canvas.
Yeah. Well, you start with simple principles. Yes, you want developers to go bring in stuff and move fast and use the latest and greatest, but you kind of slow down to speed up. For example, some very practical controls are pin your dependency versions such that you're not just auto updating without fully understanding what's going on. A second tactic is what we call a package cooldown period. So in Endor, as an example, you have a policy now where you can say, look, you can use any new versions, but you got to wait 48 hours or 24 hours. You can configure that. Why do we give a 24 to 48 hour period? Because usually if there's malware, folks like us and other researchers will find it quickly within a matter of hours. So if you just waited 24, 48 hours, there'll be enough community vetting around these new versions to know it's safe to use. So you could just have a cooldown policy like that. Certainly looking at the score factors, I talked about the 150-point inspection. If you just had automated guardrails that said, look, before a developer pulls a package in, we want to make sure it's vulnerability free, exploit free, generally has good practices followed in this library that we want to rely on for our core software, that would go a long way. So it's back to the basics, Ron. Just put some controls for verification and validation that are fully automated, that don't necessarily slow down development. And most importantly, what I think AppSec has to fundamentally shift from is from being the department of saying no and being a department that finds problems and tosses them over the fence to developers, and developers hate you for doing that, to actually finding answers for that. So if you don't like a package, for example, because it's risky, propose an alternative. If you think there's a vulnerability, go verify if it's actually reachable and exploitable. Don't put that on the developer to go do that. If you want them to perform an upgrade, go tell them which upgrade version path will work and give them a high degree of confidence that if they hit the approve on a pull request where you've created that for them, it actually won't take down their application. So I think we have to fundamentally shift strategy. And also we need to stop measuring how many things we're finding to actually how many things we're fixing. Because going back to you can now create an exploit within hours means application security being a detection, response, and compliance team is not enough. You got to be a prevention and a remediation first team.
When it comes to AI-driven software development, Varun, what is your insights on it today? Like, is it something that you're seeing all organizations do? And is there a security component to the enterprise for it?
Look, 100% of the companies I'm talking to, their CEO and board level mandates to go figure out how to accelerate developer velocity. The obvious place people jump to do that is AI coding assistance. Makes sense. But I think what people forget sometimes is if you have a lot of AI slop that this generates and all of that work falls back on the human to rewrite the code, refactor the code, make it scalable, make it secure, you've actually made the problem worse because you have more people in the developer state writing code, because it's not just your professional trained developers, it's people like you and I, Ron. We're going to write code, we're going to push code. The verbosity, the like AI coding assistance, what a human could write in 10 lines of code will likely produce 100 lines of code to do the same job. So more volume of code, more people writing code. And most application security programs are already overwhelmed and overrun by the volume of problems being detected. A lot of them are theoretical, but nobody knows how to separate those out. And as I told you, because AI has been trained on just open source code, not knowing how to separate good from bad, 60% of the code generated by these coding assistants is insecure by default. In fact, we're going to be producing some research to look out for in the coming weeks that's going to quantify even more risks, like package hallucinations. You'll be shocked when that research is released. I don't want to steal the thunder, but how many times AI is proposing a package or a version that doesn't even exist? It's not even real. Yes, there is a lot of slop. It does help in moving faster through tasks, but it is certainly problematic as well. So what do you do now? How do you solve this? First and foremost, I think you need a security pair programmer built right into your coding assistant. So just like your developers interacting with Cursor and asking Cursor to go create a new HTTP endpoint that does A, B, and C, you want a security trained professional that could be agents. In our case, Endor has trained agents to do this work, which is essentially overseeing the code that Cursor or whatever other tool, Copilot, Augment are recommending, and giving direct instant feedback to the coding assistant to go back and fix the slop, fix the security problems. And so what is the outcome you get? Guess what? You have no tickets, you have no backlog because you prevented insecure code from even getting into a pull request, right? You just held the AI accountable, and they're very good actually if you give it very direct feedback. What is the problem? But most importantly, how to fix it. Because if you just tell them the problem, not the fix, they just kind of spiral and then you lose a bunch of money and nothing happens. But if we give them the directed fix recommendations, which Endor has a lot of proprietary knowledge around, they can actually create that secure code for you. So step one, you created less tech and security debt for yourself. Step two, the problems that AI can create from a security perspective fall beyond your traditional CVE and CWEs, meaning it's not just known vulnerabilities. Now it's creating architectural mistakes, security design principle flaws that typically you would catch with code reviews, design reviews, and threat modeling. But your developers are moving much faster and you don't have enough human capacity in AppSec to do it fast enough. So what do? So what we have designed and trained in the PR process is a full AI-powered security code review, which looks not just for the CVE and CWE class of known knowns, but looks for architectural mistakes and blunders it's making. Because you got to remember, AI coding assistants are a bit like having an intern. They can move really fast, but you need to oversee them. And so we oversee their security design principles, their threat models with AI. We'll flag any design issues, auth-N issues, auth-Z issues, inappropriate handling of sensitive data type of issues, which you don't necessarily have rules around. They're not deterministic. They're kind of more business logic issues. And we do that through pull request reviews. And so the idea is, you shift all the way left, you prevent bad code from being introduced, you then do thorough design and architectural reviews in the process. And then the goal is by the time you ship your software, you have a high degree of confidence that you have fixed the things that are real problems. You have filtered out the noise through automation. Like to give you an example, Robinhood is one of our customers, and Robinhood stated publicly that 95% reduction has been evidenced after moving from their incumbent legacy, very popular software composition analysis tool to Endor Labs. So, we are taking a lot of that busy work and letting developers move faster while keeping your products more secure.
Love that. Wow. And big customers. Kudos to you all for, attracting and retaining and getting your customers to brag about all the results and values that they're getting out of it. So big shout outs to that. I would imagine that with just the linting that you're doing on all the code and, seeing those discoveries, you kind of have it both ways. You get to see like how an attacker may take advantage of some of those flaws before they even need to be validated.
I often ask myself this question because at RedLock, I could never sell the product. It was an amazing product, but companies like Dropbox and OpenAI and Cursor classes of companies would typically never buy it. They would just want to build these kind of products in-house. And so at Endor, it's very different. All of these companies are buying and subscribing to Endor's products. And ultimately, we have very interesting proprietary data that is just not generally available to LLMs. That's not just generally available in GitHub advisories and such. And so to your point, yeah, when we build these massive internet scale systems that's scanning every piece of software, every line of code released in GitHub, that is understanding threat models, that is understanding how people are consuming these different packages and applications and what's getting used and what's not. It turns out 88% of lines of code in your Git repo in a typical Java application goes unused in your application. Think about it for a moment. 88% of code in your Git repo is not even consumed in the context of your application, yet we're flagging all sorts of vulnerabilities and chasing vulnerabilities. That insight is possible because of our call graphs and reachability analysis that allows us to trace exactly how you use your code. And so, it's these kind of techniques that help you appreciate why we have traditionally had so much noise in application security tooling and how you can cut that down with very precise approaches that can harness the best of program analysis and limiting and AI.
In cybersecurity, I think we're some of the most lucky people alive because this is the one industry where you get to break into the field and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. Everybody's promoting you. They're telling you to spend, 30, 100,000. And this might be per tool, depending on the size of your organization. I know that many enterprises, especially the Fortune companies, Fortune 1 to 500, are managing more than 70 security tools and controls. And that's just in the security ecosystem, not looking at all the other SaaS and cloud and, assets, IT tech, software code out there. When I was first learning about Python, I was so proud of any script that I wrote. And I can imagine that if I had an AI coding assistant, that I would be even more proud. I'd be like, yes, this is perfect. And then if there's an AI coding assistant security co-pilot that's, out there helping me, if it makes one change that breaks my baby, that little slop project that I'm holding in my arms and trying to, bring to life, if someone breaks that through a security update, I'm going to have resistance. That's just knee-jerk reaction. Someone takes $5 from you, you're trying to save money, you're going to be a little upset. Looking at that audience, and I would imagine that CISOs are speaking a lot to that audience because they're using AI. They're getting this power and strength that they've never had before. How do you approach them? What stories, data points, information do you need for them to understand that, a little bit of tension isn't necessarily going to stop you from moving forward?
So there's a couple of things, Ron. It's a great question. I think about this a lot. So first and foremost, in the best teams, most efficient and effective teams for product and application security, I see them having a very tight relationship with their platform engineering and DevOps, DevSecOps counterparts. In fact, when we do evaluations of Endor for our customers, we encourage our customers to bring somebody from the engineering side on into the process because we think you no longer want to kind of shove, especially secure SDLC tools down their throat. You want them to pull these tools because they're actually adding net value to them, not just to the security teams. So that's one. The second thing is, how do you think about the ROI on any of these investments? And we actually, even in our product dashboards, but also certainly if we're doing an evaluation or having conversations with a customer, are ultimately calculating all of this in developer efficiency, developer hours saved in having to traditionally, they would have had to do X, but with a product like Endor or a more modern approach to application security, you save 40,000 hours a year to your development team, 30,000. So it's all calculated as hours saved and efficiency gained to your development organization. And of course, by doing so, you're saving the security organization and giving them more efficiency. The last piece of the reality of this with AI coding assistants is, look, people are driving AI in development because they don't want to hire a lot more human engineers, right? So the whole idea is you get more productivity out of the same people. We as builders need to make sure we're thinking the same way for application security teams, because you're not going to get 5 times more headcount because the code base is growing 5x. So what are the AI approaches that would make sense practically for the application security teams, product security teams, to supercharge themselves and what I call combat AI with AI, right? Or embrace AI with AI, whichever way you want to think about it. So yeah, I think it comes back to basic principles. How much effectiveness and efficiency am I driving in development organization? How much am I able to scale my application and product security function without actually letting go of critical functions? Like I've talked to a lot of teams where they say, well, look, there's too much code. I can't even keep up with code reviews and security design reviews anymore. So we're not doing it. Well, that's a bad outcome. You want to do it. You want to bring automation to do it.
You absolutely do, especially hearing about that time saving. That's always what gets me. You know, one of the things that I would say that I'm a little cheap on, I don't know why, is paying money to make money. You know, like that's just, you know, one of the things that always rubbed me the wrong way. Advertisement is one of those things. Even saving for your retirement is one of those things. You got to put some away to allow that interest to compound. I look at this as the same exact thing. This is a very small investment for a future big reward. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for, you know, people to continue down this coding faster or using AI to code if they invest in securing so it doesn't get a bad rap from the CRO one day or the CFO when, you know, thousands or millions of dollars are lost.
And, you know, we find that some of our best companies as customers are customers that service other enterprises. And so they're answerable to SLAs on fixing vulnerabilities, or you ship me a container and had all these problems. Why'd you do that? Are you going to fix it? Or FedRAMP, right? With all of these compliance mandates, you see a very high tax on development teams to keep up and keep a clean bill of health. And so if we can optimize those processes, that goes a long, long way. And the last thing I'll say is, look, our SDLC is becoming more and more complex, right? Earlier, the only thing you worried about was 80% of the code was yours. Maybe 20% was open source. Today, 80% of the code is open source. Then you have the 20% that's yours is technically not yours. It's derivatives of open source written by AI. Then your dependencies are not just projects of GitHub. There are models of Hugging Face. There are GitHub actions that are running arbitrary scripts in your pipelines. And so typically, like when we go into our customer environment, we are taking away 4, 5, 6 different tools and kind of basically simplifying the secure SDLC stack for our customers and providing them the full coverage that looks beyond just classic SCA as an example, which was focused on GitHub packages. Now, what do you do about Hugging Face? What do you do about GitHub Action Security? And so a lot of this, to your point, is people need best of breed tooling, but they also want consolidated and best of breed. And if you look at kind of my history of what we did with RedLock and now defined the CNAPP industry, that's what we've been focused on. Well, that's what I'm passionate about, is how do we solve a large set of problems that will naturally make sense to get connected and solved holistically? And how do you build the best platform to do that most effectively?
How do you do that? I'm glad that you kind of paused there, because I wanted to give you another opportunity to share a bit about Endor. But there's also this question here that I think kind of might tie into what Endor Labs does. What are the top 3 new classes of threats that agentic coding introduces? And along the way of answering that, if you could, restate what Endor Labs does.
So if you think about it, what are the classes of problems we commonly see in software development life cycles? Okay, it's first and foremost, if 80% of the code is open source or open source related, it's vulnerabilities in libraries. It's certainly potential malicious nature of libraries and versions of libraries that you depend on. As it relates to your first party code, it's obviously your typical classes of CWEs, right? Injection attacks, cross-site scripting attacks. You see a lot of problems still, believe it or not, around secrets leaking accidentally in the code. You're then combining containers and building off images. There's vulnerabilities related to that. So if you net it out, what Endor does is it solves a whole class of problems that help customers ship secure software faster by eliminating a lot of the friction of noisy alerts for SCA and SaaS that are non-contextual, not impactful and such. Now, what does AI do that kind of goes above and beyond this? I'd say the primary classes of problems there are, first and foremost, certainly AI is trained on a data set of code where it doesn't understand good versus bad. It's not labeled data. So 60% of lines of code tend to have security problems, from, again, your classic injection issues to even like things like package hallucinations. It will recommend a package version and library that doesn't even exist, for example. So that's kind of one class of problems, the known. The second class of problem is it actually introduces architectural things that are just amateurish. So it may create an API endpoint if you ask it to, but if you don't specify that you want proper authentication and other practices, it may just not do it, even though it sounds obvious to you that, gosh, I have an API endpoint, I need authentication. It may not do it. It might accidentally change your session timeout from 1 hour for your app to 24 hours. No, if you're not paying attention to these things, it will materially weaken the overall architecture of your application. So that typically tends to be kind of the second class of problems with that. And the third class of problems are really more around extensions of LLMs. So like everything we've built around security has been around GitHub. And now you have these new ecosystems of people want to use open source models of Hugging Face. Well, guess what? We're talking about these attacks over malware. I guarantee you from NPM, this stuff is going to go extend into Hugging Face. We've already seen it in the past. So are you thinking about, I'm pulling a new DeepSeek model? Is it the legit model? Is it tested, verified? All of those kind of problems. So yeah, look, for our customers, we typically remove the developer tax, as we call it, out of the SDLC security processes. We help you ship code faster than ever. We typically eliminate 95% of the noise your typical security scanners are creating for you. And we don't leave you at the altar with a bunch of problems. We actually take you all the way by identifying the best paths to fixing them that will not break the applications for your developers.
Love that. Love lowering the tax and not leaving you at the altar, because that's so important. I can only imagine all the times that anyone out there has kind of felt that way. I know I felt that way. I think I'm buying this amazing tool, and then, you onboard it, and then you don't hear from your sales rep or your customer success team anymore. I'm glad to hear that you have such darling of customers, especially hearing about some of the big ones like Robinhood that you shared, some of their details about the wins that they've already had. Varun, thank you for jumping on the podcast. Thank you for being kind enough to sponsor it, and for a great partnership. I'm wishing you all the best. Is there any direction or links or things that you'd like to share before we wrap up here?
Ron, I had a blast here. I mean, look, the best thing I can share is two assets. One is check out our Endor Labs blog. You'll see a lot of content that is written by engineers for engineers related to how to think about software supply chain security and AI coding assistance and all of the risks we've been discussing here. The other thing I would point you to is endorlabs.com/customers. Really just hear from our customers. What do they see? What are they excited about? What has their experience been, moving from incumbent kind of products to a modernization with Endor Labs.
Excellent. Be sure to go there, endorlabs.com/customers. We'll be sure to drop that in the comments as well. Varun, thank you again. And also thank you for everybody taking some time out of your busy day to jump on and learn more about how we can do a little bit better at securing our supply chains. And with that, we will see everyone next time.